Welcome to Just Got Played. This is your boy Jim Jam JJ here, and I got another Transformers the Deck Building Game video for you. I want to go through here as the new year starts and go through all the old sets that came out last year and give my little review of them. I'm going to give a slight overview and then give my pros and cons. I'm not here to smack talk the game, I'm just giving an honest review of what I think of the game so far. So I'm going to start with the overview and then move on from there. So here we go. In Transformers, the deck building game for 1 to 5 players from Renegade Game Studios, each player is going to have an Autobot character for the base set, and they're going to be taking on the Decepticon adversaries. The goal of the game is to defeat the 3 adversary bosses before the Matrix deck runs out. You're going to be taking your character and traveling around the Matrix, which literally is a matrix of cards that you can flip over and then buy potentially. Some places like sites or adversaries you'll have to fight, so you can't buy those and they don't go in your deck. Sites stay on the field and have ongoing effects once your character is on them, and then adversaries go into your victory pile and can score you victory points at the end of the game. The Decepticon bosses are close to the same, kind of like the adversaries are, I should say adversary bosses. They are Decepticons in the base set, but adversary bosses have a higher cost to fight, and they also have devastating effects that affect everybody that is playing the game. So there's like a built-in timer as well, because even when you purchase cards from the Matrix, you replace them from the Matrix deck. When the deck runs out, the game is over, and if you haven't beaten the bosses by then, you lose the game technically. Basically you just want to find the bosses, which is a weird thing about the game. I should say weird. It's new for Transformers the deck building game. It's a new thing that they put in because most deck builders, as y'all probably know, have a face-up market area to buy the cards. But in Transformers the deck building game, you have to go around on the grid and find cards to buy. You have to use your movement to move around orthogonally, orthodontically, to find cards, and then move your character onto a card, and then you have to flip the card over and see if you can buy it or not. So like I said, if it's an adversary or a site, you can't buy it. So hopefully you're getting something good. You can't see what you're buying, so that's one of the frustrating things about this game. But even if nobody buys a card from the Matrix, you still have to discard a card off the top of the Matrix deck. So it turns into like a little clock. So each round, at least one card is going to be removed from the top of the deck. And hopefully you find the bosses before the deck runs out, because you lose. And hopefully you bought enough good cards to be able to fight the bosses, because the lowest number on the bosses is 6, and it's like 8 and 10, and there's even 12s in the later sets. That's basically how the gameplay goes. It functions like a regular deck builder, except you have a character, so it kind of mixes in DC deck builder. It's pretty much the closest thing I can think of to like a simple comparison, because no other deck builder, at least as far as I know, has a little matrix area where you're going in and searching for cards to buy and hope you get something good. If you get like a bunch of 2-cost cards, or you're flipping over a bunch of 2-cost cards, you're not going to be strong enough, because like in Power Rangers, the deck building game from Renegade Game Studios, there's not a lot of draw power in Transformers, the deck builder. So the Matrix, and then confronting, there have been other games where you fight cards in the card row, like Clank or Ascension. So that part's similar, where you're having to fight. What's different about Transformers the deck building game is your other people that are playing with you can assist you. There's a little assist function if they're within range. There's like a bunch of like specific card clarifications that have to do with assisting. When you're fighting, you can only give up one card, has to have a power on it, and be in range. So there's those little finicky things that are in there. So that's a little bit different than other games where you fight cards in the card row. That's pretty much it. There's Energon abilities, but that's kind of similar to another function where you can pay a resource to use an ability on the cards you have. That's kind of similar to other games, but it's very thematically, because it is Energon. Autobots and Decepticons, Transformers need Energon to function. So that's a good thematic point. The Energon cubes look very nice, but they're the typical little cubes that you would use in most deck builders, or any game really where you have cubes. That's pretty much it for the overview. I didn't really go into too much specifics because you've seen it before in other videos. And if you need more specifics, then I can go and do an actual breakdown of how to play the game. But not too much different than a deck builder, other than the Matrix. So that's what I want to focus on. And then next, I'm going to talk about my pros and cons of the game. I'm going to break down each little specific component in the game. So first, we're going to start with the Decepticon bosses, the Adversary Bosses. All right, so now we're going to talk about the Decepticon bosses, Adversary Bosses that come in the base set of Transformers, the deck building game. You start off as Autobot characters fighting the Decepticons. Kind of makes sense. It's the first base set, so why not be the Autobots? The Decepticon bosses, Adversary Bosses that you're going to be playing are level 1 Soundwave and Astro Train, level 2 Starscream and Blitzwing, and then level 3 Megatron and Devastator. So you only choose one of each level to play. You can do it randomly, or you just choose which your favorite Decepticon is to fight. So let's see, pros and cons. So let's see, thematically, Soundwave and Astro Train being level 1 is kind of interesting, I guess I should say, because you have a Triple Changer versus the Master Spy Soundwave with all his cassettes. So level 1 kind of makes sense, I guess. Astro Train, if most people don't know, was a later release. The Triple Changers, they had 2 alt forms and a robot form instead of, like most Transformers, they only had the 1 alt form. If you guys know anything about that, in the later series, it was more like a G2 type thing, and then the movie. So an older character with a newer character, newish character. I mean, it's kind of like 30 years old by now, but newish. And then you had Starscream, and then Blitzwing, another Triple Changer that was introduced later on. Astro Train was first, and then Blitzwing came in after. They were both in the movie at that point. I think it was the second season when they came in, not Generation 2, the second season of the TV show. Blitzwing, a very popular character for most people. And of course, you have Starscream, the ultimate antagonist, smack talking, always trying to usurp Megatron for control of the Decepticons. So of course he's in there. And then level 3, obviously you have the big bad guy, Megatron, and then Devastator, which kind of so they're both the same power cost to defeat, and they're both level 3s, but it's like you have a combiner with Megatron. I guess that kind of makes sense. And then this is his tank form, I think. You can't see the alt mode in this, but in the later sets, which I'll go over later, the next set which I'll go over later, it is his tank form, not his PP2K or whatever the German gun is, which is a big change. I don't even know. Well, if you want to get to the real backstory of Transformers, you guys know that it was, from Japan toys, and the PPK was the gun that they had, and they kind of just threw him as Megatron. But tank is way much better. Let's just say that. It just makes more sense that he's a tank, obviously. And then you have Devastator, the Constructicons form Devastator, the first combiner of the series. So those two, I mean, thematically it makes sense, but that's very interesting. So the fact that you have bosses that you fight in Transformers the deck building game is a good concept. The ones that they chose to start out kind of make sense. You have the 3 main characters from the TV show, pretty much the whole series, until they died or changed. And then you have Triple Chain. I mean, Devastator came out before Blitzwing and Astro Train, if you guys know your history from the show. So yeah, I get what they were doing there. These 3 make sense. These 3 are kind of okay. So let's talk about the fact that there is bosses you have to fight. That is a good concept. It's good for a goal of the game. So Transformers deck building game is a little bit different because there's no victory points on the cards. Not too many games, as y'all know, not too many deck builders are like that, where there's no victory points on the cards. Your goal is just to defeat adversaries. That's the main way you get victory points. And then, as you can see, the cost is higher on the bosses, so you want to defeat those to get more victory points. Hopefully you do it by yourself, because if you have somebody assist you in a confrontation or a battle, they will share the VP value with you. You get VP when you defeat the adversary, and it's on the bottom of the cards. And also at the end of the game, depending how much power is totaled up on the adversaries that you defeated and relics, you will get more victory points for that. But the main victory point is fighting them during the game. So very interesting concept. I like that a lot because you're not just fighting stuff just to fight stuff for victory points. It actually triggers the end of the game, fighting the bosses at least. So it gives you something to go for. You still have to search for them though, just like any other adversary or card in Transformers deck building game. So that part gets a little bit annoying when you know the Matrix deck is getting low, and yet you have not found the second or third boss, which I've had that happen. So that part is a little bit infuriating. So that's it pretty much. That's all I got to say about the Decepticon bosses, adversary bosses. Let's move on to the starter deck cards. All right, so the starter cards in Transformers the deck building game, you will have 6 copies of Courage, 1 Patrol, 1 Fix, 1 Reserves, and 1 Firepower. So the main crux of Transformers the deck building game, as I said before, is that the fact that you don't have an open buy market. You don't get to see what cards you're buying. You will have to flip over the cards, and then hopefully you can buy it. Having a card like Patrol lets you flip a card adjacent to the space you're on and see what it is before you move on to it. So you might want to buy it. Could be an adversary, and adversaries have a surprise effect that goes off, kind of an ambush ability, once you move on to the space or the card is flipped over while you're on that space. So Patrol, being that it flips over a card adjacent to you, is a nice addition, already having it in your starter deck. But you only get 1. It's 1 out of 10 cards that let you flip over cards. So that's pretty good that you start with that, but that's the toughest part of the game. That's my biggest issue. So you have Fix, which will return a damage you control or any other player controls in your space or adjacent to your space to the stack. I'm going to talk about damage cards after this, so you'll get my critiques on that at that point. And then you have Reserves, which gets you Energon if you have 3 or fewer. That's pretty good because you need Energon to use Energon abilities. I also do transform or convert your Autobot for the base game. And then Firepower, which just gets you 2 power with a range of 1. So cards you use in Transformers the deck building game will usually have a resource on the left side. There's going to be range, usually with power. And then you're going to have movement as well. So movement can come by itself. Power can come by itself, but range is usually attached to power because you have to use, the only way you can use power on a different space is that it has range on the card. So that I will put in my critiques as well, the fact that you have to have range. Range only affects the card that it's printed on and can only kind of spread power into another space if it has range on the card. So you gotta get a little bit of everything. Movement in Transformers the deck building game for the Autobots is in their alt mode. They don't have any movement, base movement in their robot mode. So you need movement on your cards if you plan on flipping your character over to its bot side, because on your alt side you have -1 power and you need power for fighting. So I mean, you're dealing with cars and or motorcycles, so they're not going to have a fighting ability, and they're going to be weaker in their alt mode. So you need to be in your bot mode to fight, but you lose your movement. Apparently, robots can't walk. So in order to have movement to go anywhere in your bot mode, you need movement on your cards. So your starting cards, Reserves, Fix, and Patrol, along with their abilities, also have the movement icon on there. You get 1. So you only have possibly 3 moves in your bot mode at the start of the game. My personal strategy is to stay in my alt mode, moving around, getting cards, building up my deck, and hopefully getting rid of my starter cards because Courage is bullcrap. So that is the goal of my beginning parts of the game: get better cards, but you have to be able to find them, and only you have Patrol to flip them over. So, and then movement you need to use for as movement points you need to use for move and also for flipping cards. So there's going to be a lot of times you're not going to be moving very much because you're flipping cards. So you're going to be moving in like little, 4 card space during your turn, just trying to flip over cards good enough to buy. Hopefully you get some higher value cards and have higher value higher cost cards when they higher value too, because they cost the more they cost, the better the cards in general. So hopefully you have enough power and enough movement to flip over cards, find a good card, and then put it into your deck. As you can see, compared to Power Rangers, the deck building game, there is no base destroy card in your starting deck, so you have to find a card that hopefully will destroy cards. A lot of the adversary fight bonuses have that as a reward for fighting an adversary, destroying a card you control. Yeah, that's pretty much it for the starter cards. Let's move on to the damage cards and transform and roll out. All right, so now we're going to talk about the damage and transform and roll out cards. The transform and roll out is your basic buy, always available card. It costs you 2. You get 1 power, 1 range, and 1 movement, and you may transform when you play the card. So just like kicks in DC and explore cards in Clank, and then blasters in Power Rangers, the deck building game, these are always available and always give you some kind of benefit. They are a little bit weaker because usually when you buy a 2-cost card, the only available is usually 2 costs, and it usually gives you a buying power that is equal to or higher than the cost of the card. So it's a little bit weird in Transformers, the deck builder, that you only get 1 power for the card. It gives you the ability to transform, which is kind of good depending on what your character abilities are, and then the 1 range and the 1 move. So it's kind of versatile, but you don't have as much buying power, which is one of the weaknesses of Transformers, the deck building game. It's really hard to get higher buying power by default, especially if you don't find a card in the matrix. And then damage is a little bit different because it doesn't, in most deck building games, you have cards that slow down your deck, like stuns in Power Rangers, the deck building game, and then weaknesses in DC deck builder. But damage, once you acquire it, usually from fighting an adversary, it goes in front of you and it forces you to accept an assist from another player. Now, this is not a big deal if you're playing co-op, but in competitive mode in Transformers, the deck building game, you don't want to let your opponents, your other non-teammates, it's not really opponents, but the people that you're being competitive with, you don't want them to get more victory points. And that's one way of doing that is not accepting their assist. So it's kind of weird because the assist process is in clockwise order. When you're going to confront an adversary in Transformers, the deck building game, you ask everyone that is within range if they want to offer a card to assist. If you end up using that card, it goes away, so they have less of a hand when they get to their turn. But the card has to have power on it, and you have to be within range. So if there's no range on the card, they have to be on the space with you, which is interesting because not a lot of times where you're going to be falling right behind somebody else and going to the same spaces they're in, unless there's really a card you wanted to buy previously. So your assist is limited by your range. There's not a whole lot of 2+ range cards. And then also if you do accept their assist, which is after they offer assist card, you can actually choose to, unless you have a damage in front of you, to not accept their assist. And then if you do accept it, they share equally. It's not split up. They share it in the rewards of whatever adversary that you defeated had. But damage is forcing you to do that, so it's really only detrimental in competitive mode. So all it does is sit out there, and then for every 2 that you have at the end of the game is going to be -1 victory point. Losing 1 victory point isn't that much. I've never seen anybody, not too many times that somebody wins with just a victory point or loses with just a victory point. So, and I've only seen like 3 damage, maybe 4 damage at the most at the end of the game. It's really, there's ways to get rid of them if you really, are focusing on that. Plus you have your fix in your deck, in your starting deck as well. So eventually you'll end up drawing that if you don't get rid of it. Hopefully you didn't, because that is one of the cards you don't want to get rid of. So I would prefer to see a card that goes into your deck and slows you down, which is, by spoilers, they kind of fix that in later versions of the game. So the damage being out in front of you is it's like a speed bump, if that, like a mild speed, like a low curb, like a neighborhood with no curbs, but you park on the grass and the neighbor gets mad, like, don't park on my grass. Well, there's no curb here, so there's nothing to stop me. It's basically just like look out for it. And I don't know. it's kind of weak in my opinion. I'd rather have stuns like they did in Power Rangers, the deck building game. So there's that. I think we're gonna move on to finally. Oh no, we're gonna talk about some notable cards that go into the Matrix that I just thought were very interesting. So we'll go to that next. All right, so we're gonna talk about some notable cards that are in the Matrix by default. The ones I want to point out are Energon Mine, large and small, and then Energon Drill. So Energon, other than fighting adversaries, is hard to get in Transformers the deck building game. The Energon Mine sites, once you're on them, you get to pay X amount of move, and then you get that much Energon that's on there. Once the Energon is gone from the sites, they go away out of the game. But if you want to get a big chunk of Energon, 4 or 5, or how, movement, especially in the beginning, is easy because you have movement on your alt mode and your starting cards. You have 3 starting cards that give you movement. Plus, if you bought some Transformer Rollout, which are always available, there's some more movement there. So to get a big chunk of Energon in the game, these sites are a big way to do that. Otherwise, it's not really that steady of a flow of Energon, except for Energon Drill, which gives you 2 Energon. That's a whole lot. It's only 1 power, but you do get 2 Energon, and if you're on a site, you get a 3rd Energon. So getting a big chunk of Energon is good because you can transform and use both of your character abilities and possibly on a couple of your cards in the same turn, which is pretty really good in Transformers the deck building game, because getting enough power to defeat the bosses is really critical all in 1 turn. And unless you're getting really lucky by getting high power cards out of the Matrix, that's one way you can do that, is using your Energon abilities. And then I just put out Jetfire out here because he is the only relic robot in the game as far as I've seen in the base set. So him being both a relic and a robot and with 4 power, that's really good. He is 8 to buy. So if you are able to find him, if he ends up being in the game, definitely want to get him because he's got a lot of power. Costs a lot, and then at the end of the game, or instead of putting the card in your discard, talking about relics, you can actually put that in your victory pile instead. So you could use it for the game, and then he's going to give you 3 VP at the end of the game, which is very nice. So look out for those cards, and hopefully you can grab them during your game. Hopefully they're in your game, because you don't always use all the cards during setup, all the Matrix cards in the game for every game. So hopefully they're in there when you get to use them. Other cards, really high power cards, 1, and then 2, you really want cards that let you peek or flip over cards in the Matrix. That way you don't have to spend the movement moving to those cards and then end up being like a 2 cost card or something like that. So that would be my strategy for the game. Get cards that let you flip over cards, other cards in the Matrix. And then also just to peek at them. There are a couple cards that just let you look at the card, and then you can put it back down. Hopefully you have a good memory, unlike me, and won't forget what card it is. So lastly, we're going to talk about characters. And finally, characters in the game, the whole crux of the game, the reason why you even bought the game in the first place, at least in my opinion, that's how it was before I even knew how the game was played. I needed to know the characters in there, and usually they always have the big 2, most favorite, Optimus Prime and Bumblebee, especially more recently after the Bay movies. Blah. But they are always usually somewhere in the periphery, always the main spotlight of every single Transformers IP that's out there, comic books, TV shows, movies, and board games, video games too. Can't forget about the video games. There's some good ones out there, but specifically in Transformers, the deck building game, obviously you have Optimus Prime and Bumblebee, and then as well as a lot of the other G1 mainstays from season 1, and then you have RC for some reason. She didn't come out into the movie, but they do have her movie version here instead of the motorcycle version, which most newer generations are used to, is her blue motorcycle. But this is her pink car form. If y'all didn't know, that's what she looked like in the movie. So the theming part of this is very confusing because they have the old school characters, Optimus Prime, Bumblebee, Wheeljack, Jazz, Ratchet, and Ironhide, and then they just threw RC in there. I don't understand, just diversity or something like that. But what you see here is the ranking as far as my tier list is concerned, as far as usefulness of cards. Optimus Prime, shocker, is the top, and then Ironhide's on the bottom. So without going into a deep dive of all their abilities, I just want to say why I think these cards in this order are specifically the best up here with Optimus Prime, and then the worst with Ironhide. Optimus Prime giving you extra power when you have more bots in your play area, during your turn. And then everything else is mostly 1 power for everything. And then you have healing with Ratchet. So their alt modes are pretty much the same, not too much different. They give you the -1 power when you're in the alt mode. That's the main thing. And then in general, they give you a transform ability. So when you transform, they let you do something. So Optimus Prime is great because in his alt mode, you get +1 power, and you may transform prior to the ambush. Ambush happens when you are getting ready to fight any adversary in the Matrix. So you get a +1 power, and you get to transform, which is good because you don't have to waste the energon in transforming. So basically, he shows up ready to fight. And then Bumblebee lets you flip an adjacent card in the space next to you face up. So like I was saying, flipping cards and seeing what they are without having to move onto them is really good. And then you don't have to spend the movement there with Bumblebee's ability. And then RC is really good because she just gets 3 movement. She's faster than everybody else apparently as a 1-seater car, some kind of space car. I don't even know where that design came from. And then the other abilities are not so great. Transforming, may transform. Ironhide, the first time you transform this turn, you get a +1 power. But when I flip over the cards, you'll see why I put them on the bottom. All right, so we're going to talk about the bot sides here. Because really with the Autobots, they're cars. So you're not going to get a whole lot of benefit fighting-wise. On their other side, you really want to use that movement in order to flip over cars to see what you're going up against or wanting to buy. And flip them back over to the bot mode. Once you got a good enough, deck going, and then you have enough power being drawn, you want to get into your bot mode and hopefully start taking down the bosses when that happens. That's what I prefer to do. Once the bosses are out and I can see level 1 or level 2 at least, I'm going to flip over the bot mode, and I have enough movement cards in my deck and power to be able to move around and attack everything. Nothing like having 10 power, 12 power, and then you can't move over to the adversary. I've had that happen a couple times. That is very rough. So similar to Clank, it happens as well. If you don't have enough of those boots on your cards, there's really nothing you can do, which ends up happening the same way in Transformers deck building game. That's why it's a little bit weird, because it's not a deck builder with a board, but it is because you have to move. Even though you don't actually have a board, you have areas you have to move to. So that part's interesting. But once you get into bot mode, you have 2 bot abilities and a passive ability on your bot side. So let's start with Optimus Prime. Each Autobot you play during your turn has +1 power. So if you're just using the base game, all the bots that you're going to have are going to be in your deck. They're all going to be Autobots. So there's no differentiation there because adversaries are going to be Decepticons and they're going to go in your victory pile. So that if you manage to find bunch of bots and put them into your deck, he becomes really strong. So usually you get pretty lucky with that, hopefully. But what's nice about Optimus Prime is his 1 cost energon ability is draw a card. Not a whole lot of draw power here in this. Like any of the Renegade board or deck builders, for some reason they don't want you to have a lot of draw power. So being able to just draw a card, hopefully it's at least a 2 power card. Because you spend 1 energon for a 1 power, that hurts, man. For courage or something, that hurts bad. And then for a 2 energon, you can block, and it gives you a range 2 block, which is pretty nice. So usually when you have blocks, they are on your cards, and then when you block, you have to discard the card in order to block. So then you lose out on all the icons that go along with that card, and you have less cards in your hand for the turn. And what's bad about that block is, in order to use blocks on your cards, you have to hold the card in your hand, and you can't have played it and then use the block, which is really rough because if you're not going to get an attack, then you might have wasted the icons on the card and especially the power. A lot of block cards have power mostly and then movement, so you lose out on that if you didn't decide not to play the card. So that part is rough. But with Optimus Prime, as long as you have 2 energon, you can always have a block that's range 2. And then Bumblebee, during your turn, +1 power for each ally you control. I put Bumblebee second because his alt mode ability is pretty good, and his passive ability is okay because if you manage to get allies, they actually go into play right away when you buy them instead of going into your discard pile. So he just has a passive ability for allies, and hopefully they just, stay out. The allies in the Transformers deck building game abilities are kind of not that great. But being able to use Bumblebee and getting +1 power for them makes them a whole lot better. And then for 1 Energon, you just get +1 power. And then for 2 Energon, each time you draw an encounter card this turn, draw 2 encounter cards. So it lets you choose I assume, at least if you, have any gaming experience, you want to draw the least hurtful encounter card that you can, in order to mitigate the hurt process in here, because there's some encounter cards that will add 5 power to the adversary when it's flipped over, so that can really be rough for you. As I said way in the beginning, it's really hard to generate power on a consistent basis in Transformers the deck building game. So that will help you a little bit with Bumblebee's ability. And then you have RC. The first time you play a maneuver during each player's turn, draw a card. So once again, drawing cards, very hard in any of the Renegade games. So being able to do that, especially with her passive ability, you get a few maneuvers and then you get to draw, you're pretty much drawing a card every turn. So that's pretty good. 1 Energon ability, +1 power, 2 Energon ability, reveal the top 2 cards of your deck, draw one of them and destroy the other. So she lets you draw a card with her passive ability and then draw a card again with her 2 Energon ability, and then you can destroy one of them. Hopefully it's a starter. Get rid of them courages. And especially in the early game, clean out your deck. Hopefully you get a bunch of cards because you're getting an extra draw and getting a lot of high cards and then getting rid of all the other ones. The other guys here, abilities are okay. Wheeljack's +1 power. Jazz, if you start your turn on the site, usually, that's okay, I guess. Not going to be chilling unless it's the Energon drill, be chilling on sites too much. And then Ratchet and Ironhide. Ratchet wants to focus on damage. Obviously, he's the ambulance of the team, the fixer of everybody. And then Ironhide's the big brute, so he's going to be wanting to focus on blocks. But once again, block cards, if you find them, you usually want to play them because their block ability is not as good as the icons are on the card. And then damages, it's you can get rid of damage. Damages really don't hurt you. So if you don't want to spend the whole game just building up damages and let it happen, then get rid of them all at once. So damages, not that great. Using blocks for their ability, not that great because they have better stats if you just play the card. So that's my overview of the characters. If you guys want to talk about more, let me know in the Discord channel, comment on Facebook, YouTube, Instagram, let me know what you think. So overall, the pros of the game, and really I don't want to shit talk anybody. Matt Hyra did a good job with Power Rangers, the deck building game, and Transformers, the deck building game. 2 of my favorites out of the whole Renegade Game Series deck builders. Did really good on the theme. There's just a little bit wonkiness as far as the actual gameplay goes. But my general pro, it's very different. I would love to do a versus video with Transformers the deck building game, but I don't even know how to compare it to because there's a grid that you're moving on, so it's not a board. So that's very interesting. So that part, I can't compare it to any other game, which I really like. And I'm also a big Transformers head, as y'all know, really big into Transformers. And so I love that there's a game for it, especially when the TCG went away. I was very sad when it got canceled. Very, very sad. And I've talked about this multiple times, but very, very sad. So it's great to see that the art on the game, the characters and the cards that are in the Matrix, everything takes from the comic book series, most of it, and the TCG had the same art on there. So I see a lot of copies, replays, redos, whatever you want to call it, on the Transformers the deck building game. So that's great. It gives me a little bit of nostalgia, even though that was only a couple years ago that the TCG got canceled. But it's good to see they're reusing the art because the art in that game was amazing. So that part is really great. And the characters in general, the whole function of being able to transform, and then they have Energon abilities and passive abilities, that's great. Because you have multiple abilities on each character, so that part I really like. And then the fact that you have movement on one side but no movement on the other side, and it's negative power, very thematic. When you're in your alt mode, you don't have power, but you can move, and then in your bot mode, you have more power and more abilities. So that's really good. Also, the gameplay is kind of quick because there is that timer on there, and So once you get moving and everybody understands what all the cards are, you have that timer with the deck running out, and you have to find the bosses before the deck runs out. So that's pretty good. And then there is a nice little player aid that comes with it. I don't know why most games don't have a player aid. That would be great if every game had a player aid to like break down the rounds, to let you know what you need to do. Like forgetting to take a card off the matrix if nobody bought anything from the matrix, always forget that. So it's good to just go over the player aid a couple times. I think every game, I don't know why every game doesn't have a little player aid to break down the turn. It just doesn't make any sense. So that's pretty much the pros of the game. And then the cons would be definitely the biggest con is the fact there's no face-up biro, which drives me insane about this game. Is the only thing I really don't like. It ticks me off every single time because you can spend the whole game trying to find something, flipping up like 10 cards, and there's just 2 costs or below, or there's a site or something, or a relic. It's like, I can't even buy this. So you spend more than half the game just with a crappy deck, and you can't fight anything because when a boss is revealed, it's like 6 or an 8, and you haven't generated enough energon for or power for that. So you have to end up taking an assist. So if somebody ends up fighting and destroying or battling a couple of adversaries and beating them, they're already on the victory point count ahead of you, and there's no real way to catch up if you can't find the cards to buy to put in your deck. So hopefully they left you some. And with all the other Renegade games, having a low draw power is really annoying because in most deck builders, there's usually some kind of cards that let you draw like 2 or 3 at a time. And that's just not going to happen in any of the games that I've seen so far, including any of the expansions with the Renegade games. So that's really rough. I don't know why they didn't put that more into the game. So yeah, buying cards, especially in Transformers the deck building game, you don't get victory points for those cards. So there's no point in having a big deck. So you really want to just have cards that have at least 2+ power and just have like, 5 of them and be able to just use those cards. So really like 10 or lower card count deck is very beneficial in this game in order to win and end it quickly. So that is really tough. And then that kind of cascades over to the Transformer rollout with it only being 1 power. It's like, why am I paying 2 power to buy 1? I mean, it gets you to transform it towards the end. You don't need to transform. Just be in bot mode. You got enough movement. Just be in bot mode the whole time. So I wish the Transformer rollout cards were a little bit more beefier. You need at least 2 power. I mean, at the lowest, 2 power. It doesn't even need the range. I just need the power. So that part is a little bit annoying. Let's see. Character powers. In general, they're all right. I mean, if I have a choice, I'm going to choose Optimus Prime or Bumblebee. And then hopefully I at least get the 3rd pick. So I'm going to pick RC. And then maybe Wheeljack and Jazz, if anything. But yeah, I would really hate to be stuck with Ratchet and Ironhide. I have played the second box. So you're playing as the Decepticons. Most of their abilities are a little bit better. And I'll talk more about that when I do the review for the second box for Transformers the deck building game. But yeah, the character abilities are kind of especially if you don't get a lot of strong cards in your hand. You really want to be able to draw to get more power, hopefully get a stronger card or flip more cards over. So I think it tends to skew highly to the cards that let you draw and flip cards. So if it's one of those characters that doesn't let you do that, everything else is kind of blah. Just like Ratchet and Ironhide. I mean, yeah, I would, I would hate to play the game where you have to play one of those people. So it's really rough. And kind of my last little note on there. Hopefully, I kept it kind of even. Let me know if I didn't in the comments below. I try to keep pros and cons even, and I really don't want to like smack talk anybody's game because in general, it's really good. I mean, I'm buying all the boxes, so obviously I like it. Not just because of the theme. The actual gameplay is pretty fun. But one little thing is I see only really one strategy. You have to defeat adversaries if you want to win the game. So getting power and defeating Decepticons in this case is really the main strategy of the game. Try to at least defeat 2 or 3 of them, and including at least one of the bosses, hopefully. And that's pretty much the strategy. Keep a low deck count so you have a lot of power and can go and fight the adversary bosses, and then just keep clearing adversaries while you're doing that. Also one thing that you don't want to forget about is movement cards. At least, hopefully you can get at least 2 movement on your turn because yeah, like I said before, having a lot of power 10 something power and not be able to move to get to an adversary would be really rough and it's really painful. Hurts bad. But overall, I do like the game, and you will continue to see me unbox the newer expansions that come out. Hopefully, we'll be having this game a long time. They pumped out a lot of expansions right off the bat. There was like 5. I think 5 for each of the deck builders. So hopefully we'll get at least that 3 to 5 expansions a year, and then we can keep doing these videos for you. But if you enjoyed that, let me know in the comments below. Join us in the Discord. Come to the Discord. Comment, like, subscribe, share. Go on to Twitter, Facebook, Instagram. Let us know what you think, because we will be doing more of this. More of the unboxings of the Renegade Game Studios, at least with the Power Rangers, G.I. Joe, and Transformers. To be determined with the My Little Pony. We'll see. But other than that, thank you for watching. This is Jim Jam with Just Got Played. Catch me next time. Bye.